What is a UBI? Well, a UBI is something that basically imagine an economy where there are participants. Let's say it's a city with its own citizens, and there are maybe about, I don't know, 1 million people. And the idea is that everyone in the city, regardless of whether they work or don't work, regardless of, let's say, their situation in life, and sometimes regardless even of their age, may get a universal income, some amount that is distributed to everybody equally. Now you might say, why would these people get free stuff? They didn't earn this stuff. They're merely citizens. What's going on? Well, the idea is that money is able to essentially concentrate goods and services wherever that money is. So if someone has, let's say, $1 million, people will find them and offer their services and goods to them. There will be personal sales, advertising, unsolicited calls, and so on. And of course, this person can take some risks, and sometimes they fail, and sometimes they succeed. Let's say the risks are $2,000 at a time. And once they succeed, the idea is that the 1 million can attract the next million much more easily. You could go from 1 million to 2 million much more easily than you would if you go to make your first million, right? So the idea is sort of that making money is a bit of an exponential function or a power function, or at least something that's not linear, right? So you can make your second million much more easily, and by the same logic, the second 2 million are easier to make than the first 2 million, right? It scales up. So if that's the case, and in this year, we have people just this year, the CEO of Amazon made something like $13 billion in one day. There was a day that he was able to make that much. Why? Well, during pandemics and depressions, even the income disparity and the wealth disparity grows even more. So, given all this, people say, well, at least we should take care of the minimum for everybody, because people still need to eat. People still need to take care of all the Maslow's needs on the pyramid. You know, they need to sleep enough. They need to eat enough. They need to have housing. I mean, I guess it's possible to live without a house, but most people who have these things are more productive. If they're not necessarily looking to know how are they going to pay their rent, they might choose the type of job which they are interested in doing versus and if there's a job that's presented which they're not interested in doing, then they will charge more. So then basically, in a way, you can think of people who don't have enough to eat or enough to pay rent as sort of a bit desperate, right? A bit desperate to accept any sort of wage that they will accept in order to get to the next month and the next month. That in itself may sometimes be considered a sort of subsidy to their employers, right? Because it's easier to hire somebody who's desperate than it is to hire somebody who has their basic needs met. So the question is, what kind of capitalism could we have if everyone's needs are met every day as sort of a baseline? If we were to spend, for example, something like $100 per month on each person, right, which would be about $1,200 per year. Of course, that type of stuff already happens when we talk about public services like police, firefighters, teachers, and in most countries, doctors as well. That is not to say that people don't pay their own money for it as well. Of course, there's private teachers and private schools and so on. And sometimes there are private police guarding a specific area. But we believe that having public services actually is a net positive for many reasons for society. And so safety nets are important. But then why not simply test if people are poor? Why not simply do means testing? Well, this is where many economists argue that it's actually easier to skip that step and just give everybody a basic income and let everybody decide what to spend it on. I'd like to show a video here really quickly. It's a small part of the video. And this is a pastiche of different clips showing Milton Friedman, who is a libertarian capitalist economist, Chicago School, and someone like Martin Luther King, who is basically a democratic socialist. And they arrive at the same policy, which is to say, stop the means testing and just give the people the money, rather than earmarking it for specific things. Let each person make their individual choice as to how they're going to spend it. Are they going to spend it on a school? Are they going to spend it on food? Or perhaps both? By having a society like this, you may actually maximize personal and individual freedom relative to what we have today. So this is the economic case for the UBI. And then I'd like to talk about how something like this can be implemented non-coercively using cryptocurrency. So here's Milton Friedman for a few minutes.
This is Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize-winning libertarian economist who adamantly opposed big government.
The government is too big. It's becoming our master instead of our servant. We've got to react against it and cut it down to size.
So it may come as a surprise to learn Milton Friedman proposed a government program to guarantee everyone a minimum income.
In my book, Capitalism and Freedom, I propose something called a negative income tax. Essentially, a minimum income.
How could an outspoken free market...
This guy at this point, well, this is Reagan. He lived, I think, into his 90s, and he gave interviews. I wish I had met him. What you saw here was him talking about it, and he, into his 90s, would talk about the negative income tax. Now, the negative income tax, I should say, is a form of universal basic income. And in fact, you can hear him say it here.
Essentially, a minimum income.
So the difference between a negative income tax, let me explain what a negative income tax is. We all in the United States file our taxes at the end of the year if we had any income that is taxable, that is above $20,000. If you had less, I believe, that's the cutoff point, you don't need to file taxes. Well, if everyone is filing taxes and they've made a certain amount, the idea with Milton Friedman is to have everyone file taxes, including the people under 20, making under 20. And then if you didn't make enough money, the government would give you sort of a gradually decreasing amount until you made enough money to break even at zero, and then they would tax you. So sort of the negative income tax would be like the UBI. The difference is that it would shrink as you approached the point where you would be making zero. That is a very nice idea. And if you think of the UBI as pairing it with a progressive tax, meaning taxing people who make more money, taxing more the people that make more money than the people who make less money, that's a progressive tax, then they pretty much mathematically become the same thing. You can either wait until the end of the year and then give people who make less money some money, or you can give everybody at the beginning of the year an equal amount and then simply tax it back at the end of the year. The difference between a UBI and the negative income tax comes down to this. In the UBI, you don't have to do means testing, and you don't have to have people submit a tax return. In fact, people can argue that it is more compatible with individual liberty to eliminate the individual income tax. A tax, by the way, the withholding of the individual income tax is something that Milton Friedman proposed himself to fund the American participation in the Second World War. The fact that employers withhold tax today is actually due to Milton Friedman. But anyway, the idea is you could even do away with all individual tax filing and still have a UBI. The UBI would also eliminate the need for a minimum wage. And therefore, like Milton Friedman argues, people could take whatever job they wanted, even unpaid internships, which are often illegal in different states, in the United States and other jurisdictions. You need to pay a minimum wage today to someone. But in the future, if we had a UBI, we could phase out any minimum wage requirements, because then people could take unpaid internships. They could also take care of their children and their parents and other things that the economy today does not necessarily inherently value in the market. So taking care of your children today is a net negative, and many people actually prefer to spend more time at work, 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, sometimes trying to make as much money as they can, especially if they are a single parent. So lives would be transformed across the country if people had a universal basic income. People, for example, growing up could take an unpaid internship, and if their skills were not good enough, they would be able to contribute to the company. Today, unpaid internships are possible, but under the letter of the law, you could not benefit from your intern's work. The intern, it would only be for their benefit today. So a society where a UBI is possible also is a society where people can contribute to open source movements and science and other things that are essential gift economies. People don't necessarily make money on it. But anyway, let's continue and see how a right-wing, sort of on the monetary side, more of a right-wing approach, kind of wraps around and meets in the middle with the left-wing approach of Martin Luther King. So here we go.
How could an outspoken free market capitalist like Milton Friedman propose essentially the same idea as a democratic socialist like MLK?
A guaranteed minimum income for all people and for all families of our country.
So many dollars a week or a month, and they would get it in weekly or monthly payments. I'm Matt Orfala, and here's 5 reasons why Milton Friedman supported a guaranteed income. Reason number 1, freedom. I agree that as a moral principle, for those of us who are paying taxes, to provide subsidies for others, have every moral right to say what it shall be used for. If we want to say we will give you money only if you use it to buy toothpaste and not for anything else, that's our right. But I think we are very unwise to exercise it. I think we would be wiser and more truly charitable and do both them and ourselves more good to tell them to use it to buy.
So imagine if we didn't tell people the rules by which they would get the money. For example, if we removed the necessity for people to even disability payments. Imagine if we said that everybody gets the payment, even if they're not disabled. Well, in that case, people that get better and no longer have the disability and could be seen as able-bodied, for example, would have no incentive to hide that fact. They would actually honestly say that they would just be able to speak about their disability however they want to anybody and not have to feel like they could lose their disability benefits. Similarly, people would be able to accept any job, like I said, unpaid, but also low-paid jobs without worrying that they would lose their benefits. Think of how many people collecting a sort of a social security income would turn down jobs or get paid under the table because they don't want to necessarily reveal that they're making this income. So perhaps another argument is that society would be a more truthful society if there was no requirement to be poor or to not have enough money before you receive the UBI.
By what they will.
The people who get on welfare lose their human independence. They become subject to the dictates and whims of their welfare supervisor who can tell them whether they can live here or there, what they may do with their lives. They're treated like children.
By requiring them to come before a governmental official and be told that you may spend X dollars on rent, Y dollars on food, etc., and then be given a handout. They would be far better off if we just gave them the money and let them spend it. Because
this is coming from both a left-wing and a right-wing perspective. UBI has unified a lot of people across the political spectrum. And in a moment, I'm going to switch to talking about the zeitgeist and the movements that are happening today across the world, in Spain, in South Africa, in the United States, and all around the world, that are talking about actually phasing in a minimum income for everybody. I'm also going to talk about quickly a few experiments that were done in the past, like Canada's Mincome experiments, and the measurable outcomes that we had in terms of health and in terms of economics that resulted from that. But just a couple more minutes here of Milton Friedman's reasons for UBI.
Doing so, we not only give them more help immediately, we will strengthen their responsibility. Milton Friedman understood individuals know best how to spend money for their own sake than any government bureaucrat.
The fundamental idea is that people should be free to choose.
Reason number 2. To cut government bureaucracy.
We have too many separate individual programs.
Welfare in the U.S. is a complex maze of 126 separate anti-poverty programs.
The result? Monumental government spending.
And that was decades ago. Here's the thing, technology tends to disrupt those government programs. Like, for example, printing over here. Printing was not always so easy to do, and that was controlled by the government. But today, we have desktop printers, and free speech and the freedom of speech has been increased by the fact that anyone can print anything at any time and distribute it. Since then, we've gone on to have blogs on the World Wide Web. And all of this is radically open, and we could even see the source code of any website. Sometimes that's not really useful, but a lot of the time, that is how so many people learned how to code on the web. And in fact, JavaScript and the web is probably the largest platform today. And anyone at all in the world can open up their own window and start coding in JavaScript right in their browser, and it will work and have access to every type of technology that's available to everyone. So that's the kind of world that we have now. Nobody owns the entire network, and that often leads to an explosion of wealth and value for the world. The original inventors, like Tim Berners-Lee of the web, don't capture that value, or at least they don't have to capture all of it, like Mark Zuckerberg does in Facebook, for example. Instead, the network belongs to the participants, and that's another economic benefit of cryptocurrency. So before I get to the technology, for the next 2 minutes, I'd like to talk about the experiments that have been done and the movements that are now happening. This is crucial. This is a moment that UBI is coming into its own. Not just the Andrew Yang campaign, but everybody is sort of rallying. People from all over the world are rallying around this idea. So back in 1974, MINCOM, the Manitoba Basic Annual Income Experiment, is done in Canada. And you could actually see it ran for a while, and you could see the results. Even though there's no final report that was issued, there was research, and they found it had a great impact on public health and in psychological well-being and happiness and other things like that. Of course, that's not really surprising, because if people are not worrying so much about where they're going to get their next meal or their next rent payment, they are less preoccupied. And in fact, we could see that the effective IQ of people, poverty can actually drive down intelligence. And this is not just because of malnutrition. This is also because people are constantly multitasking, and also in order to solve a basic problem like how to get to work, they need to worry about how they're going to spend that $5. They might not take an Uber, they might take a bus and take longer and spend much more of their time. So everything becomes more expensive. Their transaction costs are more as a percentage of their income, and so on. So giving everyone a UBI also helps to sort of reduce the increase the amount of risk taking that people can do, and maybe even increase the IQ of the effective IQ of the people everywhere, which means they could be more productive, and the economy could be more productive as well for their employers. Okay, so that was in Canada, and that was in 1974. Now, in Alaska, we have the Permanent Fund. The Alaska Permanent Fund is funded by essentially taxes on oil. The idea is that the oil belongs to the people of Alaska. You know, the fossil fuels, I should say. There's also gas and others. The Permanent Fund is therefore distributed to everyone equally. So again, the idea is that who would you rather have the money, the government and spending it, or give it to you? Alaska has been scored the highest on the Gini index in the United States year after year. It's always Alaska and Utah. So if you look at the equality Alaska Gini index, the Gini coefficient, they're always sort of tied for 1 and 2 with Utah. It's interesting to discover why. So anyway, with Today's zeitgeist of essentially mayors across the US are now seeing that we can't get the UBI on a federal level. We might not even be able to get universal health insurance in the US on a federal level. So the question is, can you do it on a local level? And that is the seed for a much more local politics and sometimes a non-coercive voluntary form of UBI. And that's what I want to talk about. How technology can bring about a voluntary community-based UBI. So Michael Tubbs in Stockton, California, is probably the first mayor to introduce a UBI in the United States city. I could be wrong about that, but he's certainly very prominent. And even after he stopped being a mayor, he continues to lead Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, MGI. This is an organization that's growing and that you should definitely, by the way, to get in touch with me, I want to say you could just email me, greg@cubix.com, or you can email me even better at greg@intercoin.org. And I would encourage you to, if you want to learn more about how we, with our project, are essentially building a platform for cities to launch their own UBI, go to intercoin.org. Intercoin.org, if you go there, just simply fill in your email and maybe a little bit of information about yourself if you want. And we will reach out, the team will reach out, and we could schedule a call and discuss. Well, we can discuss a lot of things, but in this case, also how to make money helping cities to launch their own UBI. But anyway, back to Michael Tubbs. Dozens of mayors around the U.S. are essentially launching UBI pilots. As you can imagine, each of these pilots is, tens of millions of dollars is going to be spent on the local population of the town, right? And some of these are not truly universal. They pay out only to 100 people or a few thousand people, and they're only pilots. But that's because we haven't yet started to use crypto for this. You see, the missing piece is, well, before I, just really quickly, mayors vowed to launch guaranteed income programs across the United States. St. Paul, Minnesota uses the money for guaranteed income for some families. LA is about among 24 US cities with plans to launch guaranteed income programs, including Chicago and others. So that's one day ago. This is happening now. And it's not just happening in the United States. This is first of all, Elon Musk, Jack Dorsey, a lot of these people support a UBI. Jack Dorsey donated to US mayors for AGI, also donated to Andrew Yang's program now, which is the Fund for Humanity. Everyone would like to see it happen. Elon Musk tweeted his support. But this is also happening in other countries as a response to the pandemic. So in Spain, Spain's government has started what might just be remembered as the world's biggest economics experiment. They gave a UBI to all of their citizens. And essentially, not all of their citizens, but they're thinking of extending the support that they give to forever, allowing a UBI to be extended. So South Africa promised to have a UBI in place by October. Now they're thinking March. So this is really happening. Now, what is a UBI in terms of crypto? UBI in terms of crypto is basically an airdrop. It's a continuous airdrop of money, right? And now if you think of it that way and you remove the government from the equation, then you could actually have a voluntary UBI as follows. Every community can issue its own currency. So for example, here I'm going to just talk about, we have here at Intercoin the technology, I think we might be one of the only coins or the only project to support UBI for communities. Imagine if each community could issue its own currency. So for example, here, each community, each city making its own money. We already have this in Bristol, England, and Brighton, England, and many cities across the UK have their own sort of currency, just like Disney dollars or casino chips or something like that. Now, if people have their own currency for their own city, then the city can issue more of it, and it can decide how much more by a democratic process. In fact, that process itself could actually be done on the blockchain. So we, back in March, wrote about voting on the blockchain. And Intercoin is also working on governance structures where people can vote on different monetary measures of how you can essentially manage your money supply. What level of UBI do you want? And so you could take polling or voting of the population of the city and have the citizens decide, is the UBI too high? Then you vote for it to go down. Is it too low? You vote for it to go up. So every city can manage itself democratically without any need necessarily for the kind of voting that we have today, which is paper ballots, and the once every 4 years putting representatives into office. But they can do it directly, just like they're able to do it on the web directly without newspapers and intermediaries like TV shows and stuff like that. Regular people are now able to have access to this kind of mechanism. And so technology can democratize the power that people have to run their own communities. So here in CoinDesk is an article that I wrote. This was earlier this year. And it talked about how voting can be done. Of course, today, voting is still viewed with suspicion, voting on the phone, that is, voting on technology. But again, voting just like your Ethereum wallet, we trust our Ethereum wallet that's built by a third party because it's looking at a blockchain. And presumably, you could use multiple wallet providers to look at the same blockchain like Ethereum. Similarly, with voting, you could use multiple voting clients to look whether your vote was recorded properly in a Merkle tree. You could go and read this article on CoinDesk. It's also featured on our website. But back to this, cities actually issuing their own currency. Okay, this happened across cities in the US as well. A lot of this happened in the Great Depression when the money supply shrank and cities needed to issue their own money in order to have, and not just cities, but local communities would then issue money in order to match the goods and services that still needed to be provided. If you have your own city, then the question is, how can you actually phase in a universal basic income? Now, if you want to learn a lot more in more detail about how to do that, simply go on our community forum. That's probably the best way. You're going to sign up if you want to participate. This is a forum of economists, technologists, as well as journalists and enthusiasts and developers, anybody who is passionate about the social impact of blockchain and DeFi. And so if you're passionate, definitely, probably the main thing is to reach out and join our community if you want to find like-minded people who are actually doing this and making a change in the world. For example, this guy who actually wound up purchasing a bunch of Intercoin from our community, he is talking. He drives a truck and he owns a business driving a truck, and he has ideas about how we can actually help the trucking industry and logistics using Intercoin. Now, see, we need these kinds of approaches in talking about social impact because it is true that Bitcoin enables peer-to-peer transactions, large ones, but we need to solve the problems of scalability, millions of people transacting at the same time. That's one technology problem that is not currently solved, and Ethereum is working on Ethereum 2.0 for years to solve exactly this problem. In fact, if you go back, Vitalik himself always admits that scalability is an issue. Here I am at Celsius event, just moderating a panel talking about scalability of Ethereum. A lot of the projects like Kick Messenger got off of Ethereum because it just wasn't scalable enough. There's So it's very important to have a scalable system in the first place in order to let people transact in an entire city. But it's also equally important to think about the economics or the tokenomics, if you will, about this. So how would you phase in universal basic income? How would you actually have a voluntary basic income? Well, it proceeds in a few steps, and I will probably sort of end with this. And if there's maybe a few questions, definitely pop them into the discussion. So here is how universal basic income could actually be phased in into it, rolling out voluntary basic income. We as a team try to thoroughly discuss and document each of these topics as we build our technology. And by the way, just putting this out there because we do general solicitation, if you want to invest in Intercoin tokens and you believe there's a future in cities that want to issue their own currency, definitely visit our community or sign up on intercoin.org. Simply put in your email and we can have a conversation about it. But yeah, basically the more cities adopt the Intercoin token, obviously the more demand there is for it. Here's the roadmap, and I'll end with this. The roadmap for rolling out a voluntary UBI, no coercion, no taxation, that taxman doesn't knock on your door or try to send you a threatening letter. Instead, this is what happens. First, a city has to issue its own currency, like we've seen in Brighton pounds or in the Berkshires, Connecticut. Once they issue their own currency, they need to get local merchants to accept it, whether it's a university town that wants local merchants to take that local currency, or whether it's any other jurisdiction. Then you can sell the currency at a discount. In other words, visitors and locals can obtain the currency at a discount to let them obtain that currency. The merchants, by the way, take a 10% hit. They lose money when they cash out. That creates an incentive to not cash out, but instead pay your own employees and other local merchants in that currency. So it starts to circulate. So because they take a 10% hit every time, everyone's motivated to push others to accept it. Have you ever pushed anyone to accept Bitcoin? Have you ever pushed anyone to accept a PayPal payment and create a PayPal account? That's the same thing. Instead of cashing out and taking that hit, right? You wanted to keep that money. And so it creates a viral effect. Well, once money is circulating in your economy, you suddenly have control over the monetary policy. And so you can set up a fund initially to kickstart your voluntary UBI. We're actually talking to a few cities, people in these cities, about launching a voluntary UBI fund for their city. And again, this will be spent locally on local merchants, so it helps the local economy. So UBI today, even the ones given out by the mayors for guaranteed income in the countries, it doesn't restrict the money to be spent locally. But most of the stuff that you need, food, shelter, etc., can be paid to local merchants, landlords, etc. So in fact, locally, the local economy is what needs to be strengthened. And so the cities, it's not just about giving people money, because the individuals can go ahead and spend it on Amazon or eBay, or they can spend it on Netflix or something else. And then, of course, that money leaves the economy, goes to the shareholders of these companies and other suppliers upstream. If you want to strengthen your city, you must first have your own currency. So anyway, once you have your own currency and you have your voluntary UBI fund, then to prevent inflation, if you want to prevent the endless growth of your money, then you run your own fiscal policy, and the town can then implement transaction fees and taxes, whose role is to remove the money from the economy. And in this way, you can think of taxes not as funding local projects, but as actually removing excess money from the economy. Finally, the last thing, these taxes can be used as Pigovian taxes. Pigovian taxes are taxes on carbon, pollution, and other things that you want less of. In other words, it makes it more expensive to, for example, pollute. It makes it more expensive to, it imposes a cost on the negative externality. So now you actually have to pay the cost, and you can't simply externalize the cost to the environment or the people whose water you are polluting. And if we don't distribute that money back to the people, then we can get riots and protests like we had with the yellow vest in France, because then the taxes are disproportionately affecting the people that need to get to work. But if everyone gets an equal amount and the public gets the benefit of those taxes, then they will actually be aligned with the initiatives to lower pollution and to lower carbon. So UBI even has a great role to play in shaping public sentiment and support for the collective actions that we need to take today. So with that, I want to just simply say thank you for listening. And I'm sure if you have UBI happening in your country or in your city, or if you want to explore how to bring Intercoin or other projects to your city, because we talk about other projects as well. I just happen to represent Intercoin as its CEO. If you want to discover more, go to our community and reach out. The best thing to do is to say, who are you, and start a post about stuff that you're interested in. Thank you very much for listening. And I'd love to take your questions here or on our forum.